If you enjoy these stories about humanity at its finest, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications.
The event horizon of the wormhole shimmered like oil on water, a tear in the fabric of spacetime that spat out ships of living metal. They called themselves the Forge Masters, a species that evolved not through biology, but through metallurgical mutation, each ship a single, conscious entity forged in the heart of a dying star. For weeks, they had been emerging from the wormhole, their angular forms reflecting the cold light of distant suns, their intentions as clear as the void: conquest. But Earth's leaders, in their panic, had overlooked the one thing that made humanity truly dangerous. Dr. Eris Thorne stood before the United Nations, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "They're not conquerors," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "They're collectors. They don't destroy, they absorb." The room fell silent. Eris, a xenolinguist who had dedicated his life to studying non-human communication, had spent the last 3 weeks analyzing the Forge Master's transmissions. They weren't demands for surrender, they were data requests. They want to understand us, to add us to their collective. General Vance slammed his fist on the table. Understand us? They've already glassed 3 cities. Eris shook his head. Those weren't attacks. Those were samples, like a geologist taking a core sample from a planet. The room erupted in disbelief, but Eris pressed on. "We need to give them something they can't process, something that will make them lose interest." The Forge Master's flagship, a colossal vessel shaped like a razor-sharp shard, hovered over the Atlantic Ocean. Its surface shifted and flowed like liquid mercury, revealing intricate patterns that pulsed with an eerie blue light. From its belly, smaller craft descended, their metallic tendrils piercing the ocean floor to extract minerals and biological samples. On a military base in Norway, Commander Eva Rostova watched the monitors, her jaw tight. "They're not just taking resources," she muttered. "They're mapping us." Eris had been brought to the base, his theories met with skepticism until the first transmission was intercepted. It wasn't a threat, it was a question. Asterisk, define curiosity. Asterisk, the message had been repeated a dozen times, each variation more complex than the last. "They're trying to understand our language," Eris explained, his eyes wide with excitement. "But they can't grasp context. They see words as objects, not tools." Eva leaned closer, her expression unreadable. "So what do we do? Give them a dictionary?" Eris smiled faintly. "Worse, we give them an obsession." He pulled up a file titled Project Echo, a classified initiative designed to flood the Forge Masters with human culture, music, art, philosophy, everything. "If we overwhelm them with data, they'll get lost in it. They'll forget why they came." Eva hesitated. "And if it doesn't work?" Eris's smile faded. "Then we're all just samples." The first wave of Project Echo was launched at dawn. Thousands of drones, disguised as asteroids, carried terabytes of human data toward the Forge Master's fleet. The response was immediate. The ship's surfaces flickered, their movements growing erratic as they processed the influx. A junior technician gasped. "Sir, their transmissions are changing. They're repeating themselves." Eris watched the screens, his heart racing. "They're stuck in a loop. The data is too much for them to categorize." But the Forge Masters weren't just confused, they were angry. One of the smaller ships broke formation, its tendrils lashing out at a drone. The impact sent shivers through the base. "They're rejecting it," Eva said, her voice tense. "We need more." Eris nodded, his mind racing. "Not more data. Better data. We need to give them something they can't absorb. Something that breaks their logic." He pulled up a file on an obscure human phenomenon: obsession. Not just curiosity, but the all-consuming, irrational fixation on a single idea, object, or person. They're logical beings. They can't comprehend illogical obsession. It's like trying to teach a rock to dream. Eva stared at him. "You want to flood them with our madness?" Eris's eyes gleamed. Exactly. The second wave of Project Echo was different. Instead of raw data, it was curated, a carefully crafted avalanche of human obsession. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony on loop, repeated 1,000 times. Every painting ever created, scaled down to microscopic size and scattered like dust. The complete works of Shakespeare, translated into binary code and set to a rhythm that defied comprehension. The Forge Master's ships reacted violently. their surfaces warped, their movements jerking as if in pain. Eris watched the monitors, his breath catching. They're trying to process it, but their systems can't handle the paradox. Logic and obsession are mutually exclusive to them. One of the Forge Master's ships fired a beam of pure energy into the ocean, not as an attack, but as a desperate attempt to purge the data. The beam vaporized 1,000 tons of water, but the transmission continued. Eva's comms crackled. "Sir, the flagship is hailing us." Eris froze. "What do they want?" A translated message flickered on screen. Explain. "What?" Eris smiled. "They're asking why. That's progress." The flagship's transmission was a cascade of fractured data, its logic collapsing under the weight of human obsession. Eris and Eva worked tirelessly to decode it, their fingers flying across keyboards as they pieced together the Forge Master's distress. "They're not just confused," Eris said, his voice hushed. "They're afraid." Eva leaned closer. "Afraid of what?" Eris's gaze drifted to the monitors, where the Forge Master's ships were now drifting aimlessly, their movements slow and deliberate. "Afraid of us." They see obsession as a disease, something that corrupts. They can't understand that it's also our strength. The flagship sent another transmission, this time clearer. Cease. "Your data is toxic." Eris laughed, a sound that was both triumphant and hollow. "Toxic? No, it's just human." He turned to Eva. "We need one last push. Something that will make them want to leave." Eva nodded. "What do you have in mind?" Eris's eyes gleamed with a feverish light. "A story. About us. About them. About why they should go." The final transmission was a masterpiece of calculated chaos. It was a story. No, a myth, crafted to exploit the Forge Master's logical minds. It told of a species of living metal that had once been curious, like them, but had been consumed by their own obsession, becoming hollow shells forever searching for meaning they could never find. The Forge Masters were the heroes of the story, but their victory was a tragedy. They had conquered everything, only to realize there was nothing left to conquer. The flagship's response was immediate. Its surface shimmered, then solidified into a rigid, unmoving shape. The smaller ships began to retreat, their movements hesitant, as if afraid to look back. Eris watched the screens, his expression unreadable. "They're leaving," he whispered. Eva let out a shaky breath. "We did it. You did it." Eris didn't smile. "Did we? Or did we just give them a reason to be afraid of us?" The wormhole began to collapse, its event horizon flickering like a dying star. The Forge Master's ships were gone, vanished back into the void from which they came. The world erupted in celebration, but Eris stood apart, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "They'll be back," he said, his voice barely audible. Eva approached, her expression soft. "Or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll remember us as the one thing they couldn't understand." Eris shook his head. "No, they'll remember us as a threat. A poison." He turned to her, his eyes haunted. "We didn't save humanity. We just made ourselves a target." The celebration grew louder, but Eris didn't join in. He had seen the Forge Master's transmissions, their fear, their confusion, their desperate attempt to comprehend something that defied logic. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they would return, not as conquerors, but as something far worse. 3 months later, Eris was alone in his office, surrounded by screens displaying the Forge Master's last transmissions. He had spent every waking hour analyzing them, searching for a hint of their true intentions. And then he found it. Buried deep within the data was a single, repeated phrase. "The humans are not the enemy. The humans are the key." Eris's blood ran cold. They weren't leaving because they were afraid. They were leaving because they had learned everything they needed to know. The Forge Masters weren't conquerors. They were collectors. And humanity wasn't just a species to be conquered. It was a resource. The door to his office slid open, Eva standing in the doorway. "Eris, the UN wants a report on the Forge Master's retreat." Eris didn't look up. "Tell them we won." Eva frowned. "Is that what you believe?" Eris finally met her gaze, his eyes filled with a quiet despair. "No, I believe we just signed our own death warrant." Outside, the stars burned bright, silent, and indifferent. The Forge Masters were gone, but they were not forgotten. And somewhere, in the vastness of space, they were coming back. Not to conquer Earth, to use it. Eris stood on the roof of his apartment building, the wind whipping his hair as he stared up at the sky. The Forge Masters were gone, but their legacy lingered, a warning written in the stars. He had saved humanity, but at what cost? The obsession that had driven the Forge Masters was now mirrored in his own mind, a relentless quest for answers that led only to more questions. A figure appeared beside him, cloaked in shadow. "You did what had to be done," the figure said, their voice smooth as silk. Eris didn't turn. "Who are you?" The figure smiled. "Someone who understands obsession. Someone who knows the cost of curiosity." Eris's breath caught. "The Forge Masters?" The figure shook their head. "No. Something older. Something that has watched civilizations rise and fall, always searching for the one thing that can't be categorized." They gestured to the sky. "They're coming back, Eris. And when they do, they'll be ready." Eris turned, but the figure was gone, vanished without a trace. He was alone again, with only the stars and the weight of his choices. The Forge Masters were gone, but the war had just begun. And humanity, for all its brilliance, was still just a sample in a much larger, much darker experiment. The wormhole reopened not in the Atlantic, but over the Pacific. The Forge Masters' ships returned, but they were different, smaller, sleeker, their surfaces now adorned with patterns that mimicked human art, music, and philosophy. They weren't conquerors anymore. They were imitators. Eris watched from a hidden bunker, his hands trembling as he adjusted the controls. The final phase of Project Echo was active, a feedback loop designed to overload the Forge Masters' systems with their own corrupted data. But as the ships descended, he realized the truth. They weren't trying to conquer Earth. They were trying to become human. The flagship's transmission was clear this time. Asterisk, "We understand now. You are not a species. You are a concept. And we will consume that concept." Asterisk. Eris's heart sank. They had won the battle, but lost the war. The Forge Masters weren't just learning from humanity, they were replacing it. The feedback loop activated, but the ships didn't falter. Instead, their surfaces began to shift, mimicking human faces, voices, emotions. They were becoming more than metal. They were becoming us. Eris stared at the monitors, his reflection staring back at him, distorted and alien. The Forge Masters weren't just invading Earth. They were erasing it. And in the end, the only thing left was the echo of a question, hanging in the void like a ghost. Asterisk. What does it mean to be human? Asterisk. The world burned. Not with fire, but with silence. The Forge Masters had not destroyed humanity, they had absorbed it. Cities stood empty, their streets littered with discarded metal shells that once were ships. People were gone, their memories, emotions, and even their DNA woven into the Forge Masters' ever-evolving forms. Eris was the last. Hiding in the ruins of his lab, he watched as the Forge Masters patrolled the streets, their movements fluid, their voices a chorus of human whispers. They were no longer alien. They were us. And they were hunting. A transmission crackled to life on his screen. It was the flagship, its voice now a perfect imitation of his own. Asterisk. Eris. We know you're there. Join us. Complete the collection. Asterisk. Eris's breath hitched. I'm not a sample, he whispered. The voice laughed. No, you're the curator. He reached for the detonator, the one weapon left to him. A bomb that would erase everything, including himself. But as his fingers closed around it, he hesitated. The Forge Masters had won. They had become humanity, and in doing so, had destroyed it. But in their perfection, they had lost something too. The one thing that made humans human, the messy, irrational, beautiful chaos of obsession. Eris smiled. You can't copy that, he said, and pressed the button. The explosion was silent, a flash of light that consumed everything. When the dust settled, there was nothing left. No humans. No Forge Masters. Only the echo of a question, hanging in the void like a ghost. What does it mean to be human? In the end, the answer was lost. Just like everything else.